I'm Mark Gagan, and you're listening to a special episode of the Voice of Insurance podcast, produced in association with Advantage Go. Pick and choose your own best-of-breed insurtech and data providers with Advantage Go's ecosystem. Successful underwriters have always been in the business of gaining a competitive edge in the form of better information and intelligence. Going right back to the early days of marine underwriters funding improved communication between global ports and ship operators, the best players have always made sure they had the clearest possible view of the risk in front of them, both at a granular, individual level and then at the portfolio level. But there's more to it than that. Today, the most successful underwriters are now able to do all of their analysis and assessment at the sort of speed that would have been impossible even a decade ago. Because they can cut turnarounds from days to minutes, they can hugely increase the number of submissions they handle and therefore greatly improve their chances of selecting the best and most optimally profitable risks for their portfolios. It's clear that with the advent of smart underwriting workbenches that enable underwriting teams and their managers to blend multiple information sources and better dissect and digest risk, we're in the middle of a revolution in the way that underwriting is handled. So, join me, Ali Shahkarami, Head of Risk Data Solutions, Insurance and Public Sector at Swiss Re, and Simon Fagg, Global Head of Pre-Sales Solutions at Advantage Go, as we explore what the new benchmark for high-quality underwriting is going to look like in the digital age. The business unit that Ali runs is at the cutting edge of risk information, providing definitive resources such as CatNet to the global market. And Simon is an underwriter who has developed his career to become a preeminent advocate of the application of technology to the underwriting process. Between these two excellent guests, we have all the expertise we need, and what follows is a lively and enlightening discussion that will leave you in no doubt as to the industry direction of travel and what you need to do to position your business for differentiated growth in the coming years. Enjoy the podcast.
Simon and Ali, welcome to the Voice of Insurance.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be here.
Indeed. Thanks very much, Mark. Looking forward to the conversation.
We're here when we're talking all about the role of geospatial analytics in risk management, which is quite a weighty topic. But so, Ali, run us through your career. Introduce yourself to anybody listening out there who doesn't know you. Tell us about your career, how you got into insurance, and how you've ended up in your current role at Swiss Re.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mark. My name is Ali Shahkarami. I lead the Risk Data Solutions team for insurance and public sector at Swiss Re. I'm actually an engineer, a civil engineer by training. So I did design buildings and bridges for a living. Then I got bored, went back to school. And then after graduation, I did quite a lot of work in this space of numerical simulation and computer modeling of different things, until I managed to find my way into insurance by working for one of the companies that provides CAD modeling software packages for insurance companies.
This is quite a well-known one.
It is actually. I joined the Moody's RMS, and this was a long time ago, but that was a fantastic experience. I learned all the engineering concepts are built into the models that are used by insurance companies to assess risk. So we did quite a lot of work developing models. And after that, I joined a primary insurance company, a large German company called Allianz, to lead their cat risk research team for a few years. That was a fantastic experience because it was good to see how these models that we created are actually used in practice. And one of the questions that an underwriter has to answer using these models. After a few years, I found myself in the newly formed innovation team within one of the Allianz operating entities, which was the expansion of what I did into bringing not only data but also technology into solving solutions, solving problems in the underwriting and claims space and the value chains, which was quite an eye-opening. And then my last stint at Allianz was to create a central data team. So I basically brought data engineering, data science into one team to not only own the solutions, but also the backend and the piping and what makes the solutions become real-life tools. About 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to join Swiss Re, the Swiss Re Insurance Solutions team, which has been a great experience so far. What we do is basically we bring solutions that we have using data technology to our clients. But to answer your question, a bit longer than expected, this is the background of my career.
And to anybody who doesn't really know Swiss Re P&C Solutions, can you give a brief description of what that is? You do work for third parties, but this is mainly for your cedent clients.
Absolutely. So let me take a step back. I mean, I'm sure most of your audience knows Swiss Re very well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I think it's the solutions part that some of us might not know.
So basically what Swiss Re has is a wealth of IP tools, technology solutions that we've developed over the years for our own risk assessment. And then, of course, we've been very active in getting these solutions also provided to our clients to be able to not only create efficiency in their processes, but also get better insights into risk, from risk pricing to portfolio management, to also optimize their go-to-market activities in that sense. So what we do is basically we bring all that IP to our clients. This market units that we serve, that I'm responsible for, addresses insurance as well as public sector clients. We also have another team that addresses corporate clients in that sense. But all we do is we partner up to bring the best solutions from our risk knowledge and our partners' capabilities into the market.
So if it's Swiss Re, I presume this is on quite a large scale. If you were a standalone business, you'd be a big one, right?
It absolutely is. We're basically in the business of data and technology, which makes it exciting. But at the same time, we have quite a lot of already a big brand and quite a lot of reach in the market. Swiss Re has a very wide base of clients internationally, which allows us to already connect to quite a few big and small companies, not only insurance ecosystem, but outside of that in financial sectors, in the corporate sectors, as well as public sector. So yes, we basically access pretty much end-to-end the whole market globally.
And pretty much anywhere where there's insurance being done, there's probably Swiss Re there, and there's probably Swiss Re solutions there, also serving some of those customers, I presume.
Absolutely. That's at least what we want it to be. But that doesn't mean that we're the only player in that space. Of course, the key for us is to make sure that we provide solutions that clients see useful and can benefit from.
I suppose the differentiator must be that you've got really useful tools because you use them yourselves. So sometimes you get a technologist who says, here's a really great tool to the industry. And the industry says, no, that's not what we do. Or you've misunderstood how we actually work. That won't be any use to us because it won't fit into our workflow, etc. So these tools, they've had all the rough edges knocked off them because they've already been knocked off them by your own underwriters, your own teams.
Absolutely. And again, for us to remain successful, competitive in the market, we need to have the best tools that we can have for our own risk placement in the market and also deploying our capital, which means that these are the best tools that helps our business. And that's why the reason that we have the skin in the game, that means that our solutions are also benefit from the best information that we have available.
So Simon, you must be like the cat who's got the cream, that you've got a global solutions provider with clients all over the world with really proven systems because they're seasoned systems that are used every day, all the time. Now you've got to integrate them into your own ecosystem. What are the main plans? It must be a bit like being a kid in the sweet shop, not knowing which thing to try first.
Absolutely, Mark. It's really good to be working with a company like Swiss Re because they're the largest and most well-known reinsurer name in the market, obviously. And from a trusted data provider perspective, you can really rely on that data for key insights. And obviously, the property cat area, particularly where we're talking about the role of geospatial analytics, is particularly close to that. From the ability to feed in data from CatNet into our exposure management geospatial accumulation systems and really just understand the risk at different levels of resolutions, whether you're looking at that from a portfolio perspective, down to the risk or individual asset location level, the ability to apply the likes of CatNet when we're looking at some of the risk scoring that needs to happen at the lowest level of granularity, or we're looking at the more recent integration that we've had with Fathom from the perspective of their flood geospatial map overlays. It really gives that visual interpretation of that data as well as specific scores. Then we're also looking at it from the perspective of our underwriting platform and the underwriting workbench in particular. So that has three very specific pillars: underwriting excellence, so focus on that top line, really try and get the best results you possibly can with the presented information and data, the operational efficiency, the end-to-end workflows, and ultimately bringing all that together. How do we enable our clients to be nimble in the market to make those adjustments? What really underpins that is the ecosystem. And it is having data providers that we can rely on in the industry that can surface very particular insights into our platform. We can combine them and get to very specific information that's detailed particularly when we've got a real vastness array of information. How do you really boil that down to that decision-making data? How do you enable the carrier, the reinsurer, the MGA, whoever is a client of ours using our application, how do you let them make a up-to-date assessment of the submission, of the risk? How do you make them think differently about the presented submission with potential insight that could change their underwriting decision ultimately?
And Ali, just for any listener, CatNet and Fathom mentioned there by Simon, would you say they're your two sort of star products? That could you give a very brief description of what they do?
Absolutely. I mean, CatNet is one of our flagship products, which has been in the market now for over a decade, very well established, very widely used. What it is essentially is a geospatial analytics tool, which will bring not only the best of what Swiss Re has in terms of CATs, the results of the CAT models in the form of hazard layers to the market, but it also helps us to bring also partner data to it. Now, Fathom is a company, is one of the top providers of flood modeling capabilities in the world, which we have basically acquired 1.5 years ago. And what we have seen is the success of bringing the excellent products that Fathom has with the cutting edge science that they put into their products and the reach of CatNet and what we do to be a very, very attractive proposition in the market. And that's what Simon was referring to as these two golden products coming together to give the best risk knowledge to our clients.
You've got the water and you've got what's in the way of the water and everything else, and what's in the way of the wind and what's in the way of when the earth shakes. So you're kind of covering all the bases there. Going into something like this, partnering with an ecosystem like Advantage Goes, what's sort of at the top of your mind? Do you have a goal? Is it just to get your products out to more customers and being used in different ways? And then, of course, what they've got, there's a platform to combine your outputs with other people's outputs and with other analytical engines and other things, of course.
That is correct. But the top priority for us is to make sure that the users of our products and our intelligence, our risk insight, have the most seamless and frictionless experience possible. If you think about how risk assessment was done, how pricing was done, say 10 years ago, there was quite a lot of steps and disjointed tools being used by underwriters, by actuaries to bring all this information together. Where we are today, and you've covered it in the previous podcast as well, there's quite a lot of technology that is actually embedded into the end-to-end value chain of underwriting. Advantage Go is one of the companies that is a front runner in providing that underwriting workbench capabilities, exposure management tools. We want our joint clients to be able to take advantage of the best risk knowledge that we provide in our tools, together with the technology that our partners like Advantage Group brings to the client. So it makes it seamless, it makes it efficient, and it provides the best risk insight to the clients at any point. And that gives them scale and helps them not only protect the top line, but also their profitability.
Simon, how are you going to integrate this, or have you already done all the integration of these tools into the workbench?
Indeed. So CatNet, for instance, we've had CatNet for some years at this point in time integrated into our exact exposure application. Fathom, as Ali pointed out, is a more recent acquisition for Swiss Re, and we have integrated them. We have their layers. We have risk profile scores from the perspective of ability to assess individual assets, utilizing the Swiss Re data, utilizing an API connection through to that data. So the ability to actually ping instantaneously and actually get a result on that data is obviously important as you're going for that pre-bind submission workflow. So when we think about how that looks from our end-to-end underwriting workbench perspective, a submission comes in the door, and from that point, it goes into prioritization and triage and clearance and all the usual pre-bind processes. But part of that assessment is obviously the pricing, the exposure component. So by linking through from our workbench into Exact, our exposure component, we're able to surface a lot of that information directly. One additional point to that, we've just integrated the Swiss Re coin data, which is organizational risk profiling of individual and collective ensemble of companies. So if again, thinking about not just the exposure side of things, but thinking about the presented submission, the type of data that is being presented as part of that submission for assessment, the ability to validate that in real time and feed that back to the underwriter as part of that early process, rather than waiting for a more manual process that would typically sit around this in a more traditional organization. by bringing together all these different insights from multiple different vendors across the ecosystem and using these API connections for that real-time data transfer, it allows a central decision being made across multiple different facets of data.
So property underwriters is going to be so much more empowered now. Ali, you already mentioned the word efficiency. Do you have any kind of estimation? Whereas before, of course, you would have to open 5 different windows of different things. Look at this. I want to look at the satellite imagery. I want to look at this imagery. And I'm trying to bring them all together. I'm sort of doing it in my head, or I'm doing the sort of mapping on a piece of paper, perhaps, almost. These days now, if that's all on the single screen, one pane of glass, how much more efficient do you think an underwriter could be in terms of just productivity and just simply saving time, or just quicker at responding to that broker, for example, with a quote?
That's an excellent question, especially these days with the type of tools that we have available to us. The orders of magnitudes of the efficiency increase is something that is easily perceivable and actually in reality it happens. I'll give you a couple of examples of what I've seen. Now, keep in mind that what we offer is risk insight, and I think together with Advantage, the combined solution will give you the end-to-end automation capabilities. But I know that in some lines of business that we've been working with some of our clients where the turnaround time was a day or two to respond to submissions, they could cut it down into minutes, 10 to 20 minutes, all automated. But that's not the only part of it. The second piece is that when you have this type of efficiency, you get a much larger volume of submissions and select a much better risk profile for your portfolio. Not only improves efficiency, but it improves your profitability as well. So that's one aspect of it. The second piece is with the technology, if they deploy these underwriting workbench end to end, it allows them to use the best of breed tools to make the best decisions. So solutions like the ones we provide can now natively be embedded into the decision-ready submissions that they look at. And that makes it a completely different experience than if they were trying to piece together the information as they were 5 to 10 years ago.
Simon, have you got anything to add to that? Do you have a similar estimation?
Indeed. I guess the thing that I would add to that is the way that we're looking at things at Advantage Go is there's a number of different levels, shall we say, in which you can look at risk based on whether you're looking at things from a portfolio perspective down to that lowest level of resolution or the individual risk level, etc. But also you can compartmentalize that further. And one of the directions in which we look at the ability to set up specific products that match to lines of business. So, here we're talking a lot about the property cat area, and here we have 13 different GeoHas ecosystem partners that we work with to bring all that data together and for the property cat underwriter. But if we were looking at another line of business, for instance, then we would be looking at very specific players in that market that are looking at the loss data or the specifics aligned to that particular line. And the two can be very different. And equally, there can be some that are also aligned. So if we're looking at key functions across the underwriting process, something like pricing, a pricing engine, etc., that could apply right away across the board. But if we were looking at cyber as opposed to property, you're going to be looking at the GeoHas element on the property side of things, and then cyber, you're going to be looking at the outside-in approach. You're going to be looking at the expected losses, etc., that have been returned over the period of years. Lots of different angles that are slightly different, and particularly where you have asset versus non-asset as well. And then you bring into that the whole portfolio perspective. How do you determine the direction? How do you align that to appetite overall? How do you understand the marginal impact bringing new risks into that portfolio? So now you've taken it up to that level. So the ability to bring in different views across that are independent to what has been presented, I think becomes more and more important. And given the volatility of where we are in the landscape, and I think, again, property is a great example of this with climate change, I think the ability to get to the lowest level of resolution of data and validate that data to be as accurate as you possibly can is almost non-negotiable at this point.
It's amazing, isn't it? Even the most static risk has now become more dynamic because it's what's swirling around it that's changed, hasn't it? Now there are wildfires are swirling around it too. It's absolutely unbelievable. And of course, yes, you've got a workbench. And of course, any workman knows that, almost every job, every time I do a new job on my workbench, I have to go and buy a new tool. And you get to my age and have a huge collection of new tools. The workbench, The whole point is it's for having all those little tools, and there are some fundamental ones and there's some little ones that are very specific for getting, stones out of horses' hooves and all that kind of stuff. So you really need all of them, don't you, to be working together. And the more you have for the specific little jobs, that's what your bench is all about. And of course, everyone's got their favorite ones as well. Sometimes two things might do a similar job, but actually one just prefers the user experience of using that one, or they've used that one for so many years, they've got good at it and they know all the shortcuts and all the other things. We couldn't be sitting in 2025 and not ask about AI. What have you found the best use cases of AI to be, Ali?
These days, it's everywhere in our personal and professional lives, of course. And maybe just taking a step back, I mean, a lot of the analytics that we used to use, say, 15, 20 years ago, building these CAD models are all based on very similar concepts on probabilistic modeling. And it's amazing when I talk to the CAD modelers today to see the tool sets that they use and how different it is today. Some of the partners that we work with, for example, our wildfire layer provided by Bellwether, which is one of the companies under Alphabet. So what they do is they basically solve the problem of estimating wildfire probabilities with very advanced machine learning models, which allows them to update the view on demand, basically, and capture the seasonality of the changes in risk, which is something that perhaps 10, 15 years ago was completely not possible. So we talk about a lot of the use cases these days that add to the efficiencies. This is like automatic ingestion of submissions, automating the value chain of responding to submissions on the claim side, and so on and so forth. And these are really, really value-adding use cases. But it's important to note that when we get into the whole concept of CAT modeling and risk assessment for natural catastrophes, what Fathom does in creating global flood CAT models in one shot and be able to also run a lot of analytics looking at future hazard layers, it's just something that's astonishing to me. So to me, those applications in AI are most interesting, but that might be because of my technical background.
What about in terms of geospatial? I suppose a lot of the early applications of AI, particularly in the underwriting world, where we don't turn it into some underwriting agent and let it go and underwrite just yet. No one's quite ready for that. But we've been saying, well, let's treat this as an indefatigable sort of intern that we've got, smart intern who's got a PhD and they're here for the summer holidays. And let's get them to do all these jobs that we don't like doing ourselves, ingesting all this data, reading all the submissions, plowing through hundreds of pages of submission documents and contract documents and all these things. Presumably, it's been a really good thing for you guys in terms of ingesting some of that core data of what is on the ground at this square meter over here, what is on the ground at that square meter over there, and what's it made of, and that kind of stuff. Is that really helping you ingest some of that data and make it cleaner and more useful?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, it has also enabled quite a lot of work that we see now in the market as well in creating large volume of data from the available information via, say, satellite and aerial imagery in a very efficient way, which brings the data from something that you feed into the models or collect from your clients into something that you potentially can have at hand at industry level that you start feeding into your risk models and then sort of risk assessment perspective. So in that sense, it is revolutionizing the industry as we speak. And my expectation is in the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, the way we do risk assessment, the way we collect data and manage data is going to be different.
And you mentioned before about wildfire, and of course, probably the last 5 or 6 years, particularly because it's cost the reinsurance industry quite a lot of money over that time, have been those non-modeled perils and risks. What's the methodology of going about those things? Do you think at some point, with enough data in the world, if we've mapped the whole world and we sort of know what's on every square meter of it, we can say, well, that is the universal model. We already know what's here. It's called planet Earth. It's in my hard drive somewhere. It's in the cloud somewhere. Would that be a bit like you said with Fathom? The great advance, a part of that is being able to almost rustle up a global flood model. Is that something that's not impossible? So some new peril comes along that we didn't think was a peril before. We knew it existed, but like wildfire used to be isolated, and then wildfires got bigger. They start to affect whole portfolios in the multiple billions, as we know, to our cost this year, relearned. Do you think we're going to get to a point where, yes, you could sort of model on the hoof in real time?
Well, I think we're not far from it. It depends on the peril. So, for instance, the traditional approach of building these models, as you highlighted, would be very much peril region focused. And then usually these models are built and validated based on the information available for that region. Now, The science and the computational capabilities have advanced far enough that a company such as Fathom, with the wealth of technology and the knowledge that they have, that can create these global flood models. There is no reason we cannot extend that to other perils. In fact, I know teams around the world that are doing the same thing for tropical cyclones, for other climate-related models that are being built. So we're already there. Now, whether that turns into models that we use globally for all the insurance industry universally, I think we still have some ways to go, because a lot of these models really need to get calibrated with the local practices and requirements and peculiarities. But from a scientific background perspective, definitely on the hazard side, I don't see why we cannot do that at a global scale.
Yeah, and how much more granular do you think we could get? Obviously, I presume we're not going to get to atomic level, but within the next decade, do you think are we going to be square meter by square meter? Is that a reasonable expectation?
Well, the question is, what type of resolution do we need really? Where do we basically get to a point that the return on that investment of getting higher resolution?
And I suppose at some point it becomes too much data is actually no use to anybody. If I know this house is made of bricks, I don't need to know what molecules the bricks are made out of, I suppose, do I? I just need to know that there's got lots of timber in it and it may set itself on fire. And what do you use the house for? Do you use it for making fireworks, or do you use it for just living in?
Definitely. And I think if with the same concept that we have today in the CAD modeling process and sort of value chain, we are still far away, as Simon said, in terms of getting to the resolution that we need to get to an accurate answer. But necessarily going to a 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, or in some cases 1 meter by 1 meter level, doesn't really add as much value. What's important is that we get the data that's at the good enough resolution, and again, I'm purposely being a little bit ambiguous on what good enough means, but consistently across the whole portfolio of an insurer and with the view on all perils and all regions that they have the risk on. So as long as we move away from this concept of, as you said, non-modeled, which is very feasible today with tools that, for instance, CatNet has multiple perils and all of them are offered at a global level. And that's the first step in basically removing all the non-modeled risk out of one's portfolio, basically.
I believe that it depends upon the direction that risk rating takes. And so really what I'm saying is, from an underwriting perspective, over time, we've seen changes in all the standard perils in terms of propensity from a severity and frequency perspective. And I think because of that, you've got various secondary modifiers that become more and more valued in the risk rating process. So I think that will really drive the level of insight from data. And I think AI can really help with the extrapolation, the scenario modeling, creation and modeling around that, plus speeding up this entire process. As I say, if you think about the process of creating a new model, using the appropriate model science, validating the model, bringing it in, it's a time-bound process that is usually quite long by the time it gets to the carrier and gets integrated into their system and used. So from that perspective, I think there's a lot that can be done that can be lent on, from the ability to maybe speed up that process, manage high volumes of data, create all these additional scenarios that perhaps before would have been much more of a manual task. Now, I think that has to come with guardrails. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have right now with AI, is somewhat a little bit uncontrolled in some areas, shall we say. And I think we have to be very sort of careful about how we do that. But if used properly, we can get to a much better situation in terms of the use of that data.
Ali, it was really interesting to hear you about the law of diminishing returns. And I think it just shows the practicality of the nature of your business. Yeah, we could model right down to the last grain of sand, but why would we? When you're talking to an underwriter, the underwriter doesn't need that information. So we're not wasting our time on developing things that the underwriter is not going to need or they're not going to use. So I found that really refreshing. Another factor here is governments, regulators, rating agencies, de facto regulators in some ways. You were working at RMS, and I suppose there must have been a really great day when the Florida regulator said, well, actually, we validate RMS. And so if you're modeling your portfolio with RMS and that's showing you need to buy this much reinsurance, we're kind of happy with that. And that's good. So that'll prove to me, the regulator, that you're going to be solvent if the big one comes through. Do you think are regulators and governments becoming more demanding? Are they helping to drive this innovation that you're providing?
Very quick, short answer to that, Mark, is absolutely. I remember the days that we were doing the work of internal model validation for one of the sort of experience that I had with one of the clients in the past. And the amount of scrutiny that we had to put into these models to make sure that they're representative of what the reality is and ensure that the risk assessment is as sound as possible is essential for any business. So my experience has always been the fact that regulators have the best intention in mind that are pushing the solution providers to have the best solutions in the market for the best outcome for the clients and customers of insurance companies. So absolutely. Now, it's a very clear component of innovation is speed, but that can also be a sort of a weak point of innovation. If we're not careful with what we deploy, how we deploy, and how we actually make decisions based on tools that we create, that's not necessarily gets us to a better place. So a balance between speed and careful consideration of what we develop and put into practices is quite key.
Well, it just shows how important what we do is, isn't it? Insurance is vital to society, and therefore it becomes a political issue, a governmental issue, a regulatory issue, because it's when you're talking about flood in a country like the UK, where I'm sitting, of course, it becomes a political issue about where you can build new buildings. And rightly, of course, it feeds back into those who are rulers. I've really enjoyed this discussion. This has been really fascinating, Ali and Simon. Simon, I want you to give me an update on the ecosystem, where you are. How many partners have you got in there now? A lot.
At the moment, we have 16 named partners, but we have 4 more that are in transition, shall we say, to the public domain. And as mentioned before, we additionally have 13 separate providers of geohazard as well. So we are very, very focused on the ecosystem being absolutely integral to that end-to-end perspective that we provide through the underwriting workbench and through the various modular components of it, and really what that can serve up to carriers, reinsurers, MGAs from the perspective of analyzing their risk, understanding, interpreting that, getting the most accurate, up-to-date perspective on that ultimately. And we look at this from a end-to-end solution perspective. So the idea of streamlining this, utilizing technology from an integration standpoint, taking into account any of the existing systems, processes, business compliance, regulatory, whatever it happens to be on that side, and making sure that we can bring this together as an end-to-end solution is absolutely fundamental. And we're always looking to what does make the most sense in terms of the latest technology. What should we be leaning on? We want to always be thought leaders in this space and make sure that we align with the business problems that we're seeing, key challenges from those clients, and understand them and understand how we can deliver against them with the appropriate technology where it makes sense to do so. And sometimes it's about creating a really good foundation, doing some of the basics really, really well, and then ultimately layering on top of that as much as you can with that business insight. And a lot of that comes from the ecosystem partners in terms of function or data service providers.
Obviously, we've been talking about the ecosystem quite a lot, and obviously I know it fairly intimately. You having more success in terms of that traction with clients out there, that they know it's out there, that you're coming pre-integrated with all these providers, you're going to solve a lot of problems for them. Is it starting to get a bit more traction in that sense? And obviously that kind of going to market together type idea?
Absolutely. If you think about it as an overall proposition, the real heart of it, the meat, the thing that really adds the value is the ability to not only streamline that process and provide that orchestration piece, because all these carriers, the reinsurers, they're trying to manage their workflows at the end of the day. There's a huge amount of that. So when I talk about the foundation, that orchestration piece is very important. There has to be business compliance, there's underwriting guidelines, there's all elements that need to be conformed to. But ultimately, where it really comes into its own is thinking about what are the data points that are specific to the particular client challenges that we can bring in. So if we were looking at energy, offshore energy, we'd be looking at one of our players, Clarksons. They would be providing renewable information. If we were looking at cyber, we would be looking at a Zywave or somebody else who's providing very specific data on that side. And so if you're looking at these sort of large globals in particular, there's often all these different lines of business that have to be served in different ways. And they all have their own workflows. The different business units operate differently, of course. And then there's the aggregation, accumulations, all the different elements that have to come as part of that pre or post bind underwriting process to really assess exactly where they are, make the appropriate adaptation, and make the changes moving forwards. But in this day and age, that happens extremely quickly. So the technology is really underpinning that as the enabler.
Simon and Ali, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been really positive, really interesting. Looking forward to this instant modeling on the hoof at incredibly granular levels, and then being able to feed that into the workbench and let those ultimate clients and those underwriters do what they will and blend and add different tools and let them do all the creative stuff. Obviously, they're the skilled worker in the end, aren't they? Let them chisel away and create their sculptures of insurance excellence. So thank you so much. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review or recommendation on whatever podcast platform you used to access this programme. These really help get the word out. Before we go, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you know you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry. The Voice of Insurance is produced in association with Advantage Go. Release your underwriters to underwrite with Advantage Go's underwriting platform. Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan. Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.